Okay, so a couple of thoughts to go over really quick at the beginning of this video. First off, I want to say Logic is likely one of the most popular DAWs in my opinion. It's definitely in the top 3, probably right behind Pro Tools. And I've seen plenty of people on YouTube and on Nail the Mix or just any other kind of online education forum. I've seen plenty of people use Logic to mix pretty much any kind of genre. However, I can't say that I've seen plenty of people use Logic and exclusively Logic stock instruments to produce specifically metal. The difference between mixing and production being producing actually finding and recording different sounds to make the song. Mixing is taking those sounds and processing them in such a way that they fit together that is pleasing to the ears, not necessarily just a ton of different frequencies jumbled up together. You actually just make them all fit together. It's a pretty well-known fact that for the metal genre, Logic's drum samples and amp sims for both bass and guitar are pretty horrible for the metal genre. All the high gain amps sound really bad and the drum samples just really don't measure up to what you need for really big explosive sounding drums. And that's actually kind of what brings me to point number 2. Okay, so to hit on point number 2 really quickly, as a home studio musician and someone who follows all that different kind of stuff on social media, I'm tempted pretty much day in and day out to buy more amp sims, buy more plugins, buy more drum libraries, buy this mixing course. There's just a ton of different things that you can spend your money on as a home studio producer. And honestly, the way that these companies market their products and do their big reveals and the demos that they make of their products, it really makes you feel like what you're about to buy is definitely better than what you just bought, and a lot of the times it's just not. It's just really not that much better. It's not even that much different a lot of times. Logic is a $200 program that has almost 70 gigabytes of different sounds you can use to make music. That's different drum libraries, different virtual instruments for like strings and horns and guitars and percussion. Different Apple loops is a really useful tool for producing music, but for some reason Logic just hasn't focused on high gain amps and really explosive sounding drums. And that's just kind of unfortunate for us home studio guys who like to produce metal. And with that being said, the purchases that I've made, while I can admit that there's probably been too many, it almost seems like it's been out of necessity. I mean, there really aren't any virtual instruments and plugins and stuff in pretty much any kind of DAW that cater to high gain and metal production. So all these different companies, they've really found a niche that they are doing really well in my opinion. And please don't hear me wrong, I really don't have any sort of vendetta against buying third-party plugins and drum libraries and amp sims. I really think that's probably half the fun of doing this whole hobby, to be honest with you. But I do want to make this video and see if I can make a decent sounding metal track using only Logic's stock instruments. Really my goal is to just come up with some ideas and produce them in such a way that I kind of just get the point across. I even tried to use exclusively Logic plugins to mix it, and I did for the most part, but as I was mixing it, I realized I'm not very good at mastering, so I did use Ozone to kind of use the mastering assistant. And then I needed some clipping plugins for some of my drums, so I used Jst Clip for that, and maybe 1 or 2 other things, but for the most part it's all Logic stock plugins for mixing, and you can probably find alternatives to a lot of the stuff that I used. If you enjoyed today's video, please do hit that like button as well as that subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos from me in the future. Let's go ahead and hop into Logic. Okay, so I'm here in Logic and I want to take a look at the different components of this mix. Maybe just go through component by component and we'll do before and after processing. I want to take a look first at the drums. The drums are pretty much kind of like the basis for any good, really solid metal mix in my opinion. I've never really heard a really great mix where the drums sounded good and everything else sounded bad. Like if you can get a good solid layer of drums, then it's really easy to build around that. But I have heard mixes where the drums sound bad and the whole mix just sounds terrible. So you got to have good drums. Let's take a look at what these sound like soloed. Okay, so I mean for stock Logic drums, that actually doesn't sound like stock Logic drums at all. I used the producer kits, so you're able to break up the channels into different channels like this, and I'm using Heavy Plus. We pull up my mixer window and we will take a lot of these plugins off. Okay, so this is what the drums sound like with pretty much all the processing off of them. They don't sound bad, but they just sound a little duller compared to what I ended up coming up with. They don't sound quite as big. So let's take a look at the kick drum first. I moved the kick drum out of this original heavy bus and made my own kick bus so I could process the kick bus. So let's take a listen at just the kick drum and see what I did. I started with the kick in, and I added pretty much just EQ to try to get rid of some of the boxiness around like 150 to 200 hertz. There was a lot of boxiness there. I wanted some more low end out of it, and I needed way more click out of that kick in mic. And that's just some compression on that. Just kind of just level out some of the dynamics, make it a little more just in your face the whole time. Then let's take a look at this kick out mic. It looks like I pretty much just did some EQ on that. It looks like I cut out a little more kind of like boxy, muddy frequencies. Did a little more low end, and then a low cut down below 50 hertz. And then I did some processing on the kick bus as well. I did some more EQ right there. I kind of did more kick bus processing once I got into the actual mix, and I wanted a little more of that kind of click right there. And I still wanted a little bit more kind of hit from the kick. What you're really hearing from me on that is this boost at like 2.6. That's kind of the biggest thing that I'm hearing from that. And then I did some more compression to kind of level it out a little bit more. And then Jst Clip, like I said earlier, I did use a few plugins that I don't have stock in Logic, and Jst Clip is one of those. I use that pretty much all over my drums. So I have that for my kick drum. Let's see, let's take a look at these overheads. Looks like the main thing I did on that was I cut out a lot of the kick drum on that, and then there must have been some ringy frequencies going on around 4K, and then I add a little bit of a high boost to get a little bit more shimmer out of them. I really wanted most of my kick sound to come from the kick mic itself. I have the kick being sent through the reverb a little bit, and then in the room I have some low end coming from the kick. I didn't want it to be in my overheads nearly as much. And then I just compress the overheads to kind of level those out as well. Alright, snare top and snare bottom mics. Take a look at the snare top mic. So I did a boost on the EQ to boost a little bit of thickness on that because it was sounding kind of wimpy. And then got a little bit more compression. That may be the compression that came on the plugin by default. The main thing I did was Jst Clip on the snare bottom, just boosting a little bit more low frequencies. I think that may still be pretty much just what the plugin did. I didn't really have to do a ton to the snare other than clip it, and then I did boost a little bit. I remember boosting a little bit for a little more fatness on that snare. I get a lot of my sound from my snare out of my snare room. And as long as you can hear that initial first strike from the direct mic, and then the room makes it fill up a little bit more. So we got that. I didn't do anything to the hi-hat. The high tom is the only tom I used in the whole mix. Let me find a tom real quick. So on that, I know I did a ton of boosting on the lows and the highs, and then a little bit of this weird quacky frequency. All these different weird terms that we use to describe sounds, but just made it sound a little beefier. And then I also did some Jst Clip on that. I did a lot to my room. Like I said, I got a little bit low end out of that. I mean, it looks small here, but with that scale, it's actually a 10 decibel boost right around 150 hertz to get a little bit more low end. It's a 10 decibel boost, but it's a shelf from 150 hertz, so I do get a lot of low end out of that. But I also did a low cut on that around 70 hertz to kind of tame the sub a little bit. I wanted to leave some room for my bass guitar. However, there were still some of these frequencies in the kick drum. This unfortunately did affect my snare a little bit on these two bell curves I have right here. But right here at 198 hertz, that's pretty much right around that like 200 range on the kick drum. That sounds really, really boxy. And I had to EQ a ton of that out of my kick drum, and I also did it on the room to do that as well. And then I heard some weird like higher boxiness right there. Yeah, let's take a listen to it now. So we'll go before. So you're just getting a lot more of like kick drum room out of that. And then I'm going to compress the heck out of that. The compression, it is a 8:1 ratio, fast-ish attack. That's supposed to be an auto release. Yeah. I compressed that a lot, and I did add a little bit of distortion on this distortion knob from that, and I think that kind of just makes it all sound a little bit bigger if you really compress your rooms. And I really like getting low end out of my rooms as well. So let's take a listen to all that now. And so this punch channel, that's not even me, that's actually just came stock on the heavy drum set from Logic, and that is just a snare, and that's adding some boosts. Just boosting some lows and some mids and cutting some. That's kind of like a parallel channel to make it just sound a lot bigger. So that's pretty much all I did on the drums. I did send, like I said earlier, let me pull up my mixer view. So the snare is being sent to bus 32 and the whole kit is being sent to bus 30. Also did some EQ. I didn't do any EQ actually. I don't know why it's on there. I did some compression on the bus, just to kind of try to glue everything together a little bit more. That's being sent to a bus that is called my trash bus, and that is just some distortion. That would typically be Decapitator if I were using third-party plugins, but at the time I was trying to use mainly Logic plugins, so that's why that is there. The snare top is being sent to this reverb bus, and that sounds like this. Oh yeah, the kick drum is also being sent to that. The kick bus is being sent a little bit. And that is the chroma verb, and it's set on big clean room or clean big room. And I compressed that as well. I really wanted the snare to sound pretty big, like it's almost kind of just like a gunshot going off. So that's what the idea was with that. So next, let's take a look at the bass. So this is a bass DI. I went straight into the input of my Apollo interface. I'm not using any of the preamp emulations on the Apollo, just going straight into the clean pre's. And this is what the bass DI sounds like. So a pretty standard thing to do with that is to duplicate the track, so you have two of the exact same tracks, and you'll do a bass high and a bass low, or a bass distortion and a bass sub, however you want to say it. On my bass high track, I started with this bass amp to get some clicky out of it. I don't really even know anything about the bass amp. It didn't really matter to me. I just picked some kind of bass amp that had a little bit of distortion, a little bit of click to it. Then I took this EQ and I high-passed all the way up to 665 hertz. That's a little bit of a range. It could be anywhere between like 5 and 800 sometimes. It really just depends on the bass sound that you're going for and what you do with your low track and where the guitars are sitting. It's a lot of different stuff, but this is what that sounds like without that. So really just trying to get rid of any bit of low end I can find in that track. Next thing I did was compress it. So I used the compressor to kind of level out that a little bit more and try to level out just the attack on that. And then I use this clip distortion to add a little bit more grunge to the top of that. This would typically, I would use Decapitator for this, or I would use a like a amp sim. Will Putney has some pretty cool bass sounds in his STL Tones amp sim that I will use for this sometimes. And I know it sounds pretty bad right now by itself, but you just have to wait a second. And see here on this other EQ, I scooped out even more of the lows, and then I got rid of a little bit of that weird quackiness and like weird harshness at 3000. Alright, so that's it for like the dirty track at the moment. And like I said, you'll have to wait until you mix it in with the low track for it to actually sound pretty good. So for the low track, we're starting again with just the DI. Okay, so for the EQ, I scooped all the way down, did a low pass all the way to 113 hertz. This can be different. Like I said earlier, it can be a range. It can be anywhere from, you know, low 100s up to like 150, maybe even 200 something hertz. It's just whatever kind of low information you want to keep in this track. Looks like I did it at 113 hertz. And then also did a low cut at 35 Hertz. Next thing I used is another plugin that is not stock in Logic. It is Waves Max Bass. The reason I use this on this mix is because I am currently going through Brian Hood's FSTG. It is a mixing course that he's had for years now, and he uses Max Bass. And this is a harmonic enhancer, or like a harmonic producer, so it will literally create harmonics that aren't there. So I use this to, like I said earlier, with the high track, when you're tracking real bass, there's oftentimes a little bit of inconsistency. So I use this to make the track sound a little more consistent and for it to level out even more. So I have this set where the max bass is making almost as many harmonics as are present in the original bass. And then I limited the heck out of it. And if you put that together with the high bass, sounds a little bit more like an actual bass tone. And then if you go to my bass bus, I have some more EQ where I ended up doing a really wild, and I did this in the context of the mix. A lot of my bus processing is in the context of the mix. It looks like I scooped out some room for some of the low end on the guitars, because I do think I ended up boosting the guitars a little bit there. But to make it stick out, I did a huge hump right around 3,000, it looks like. I don't think that sounds bad. Looks like I limited it again. And it looks like I needed to gain it down a little bit, a couple dB or 1.1 decibels. But yeah, this is what that sounds like with the drums. And I know that bass sounds pretty harsh right now, but you'll see in the context with the guitars why it is the way it is. And so let's go into the last part I want to talk about on this mix. And this was by far the most difficult portion of the mix, and that is finding a decent high gain amp to use for metal in Logic. All of the amps are pretty well useless in my opinion. I did find some tutorials on YouTube. I'm not going to take credit for this myself. I spent time using some of the higher gain amps, and I got to a certain kind of usable place, but it did sound really just kind of unpleasant in the context of the whole mix. So I did go to another guy's YouTube channel who I'm subscribed to. His name is Soulhinge Gear Reviews, and he has a tutorial on using making a usable metal tone in Logic, and that's what I ended up doing. Let's take a look at one of the channels because they are the same. So let's take a look at my left channel. So that is just the DI. This is what the DI sounds like. I was playing my Jazzmaster. So the first thing we did was pick an amp, and we used this Logic brown face or brown head with the modern British 4x12 with a 57. You basically just turn the reverb down or turn the reverb off. He had particular settings that he used. I was using a completely different guitar, so I needed a little more gain. The bass was fine where it was. The mids and treble were fine. Like I said, my Jazzmaster doesn't really need a ton of help in that department. I actually turned the presence down a little bit. I'm pretty sure it was at 5. I turned it down to 4. Turned the master all the way up to 10. And honestly, with enough EQ, you could run with just something like that. The next step he did though was he went to his pedal board, and I agree with him. I tried all these other different distortion pedals, and pretty much all of them are pretty well useless except for this Double Dragon Deluxe Overdrive. And in regular metal fashion, we go drive down, tone or level up, and then mess with the tone. The squash and contour knobs were pretty well useless. Didn't really need anything there. I do have the mix only at 50%. I left the bright switch on, and this is what that sounds like with the Double Dragon. It's not a ton of difference. It's kind of just adding a little bit of a little bit more higher frequencies with the tone knob, and then I threw in this graphic EQ to get even more highs out of it and to scoop some of the lows out, and it looks like right around 600 hertz or so. Just trying to really get those guitars to sit right in front of your face. Then there's also a noise gate for this ending part. The noise gate helped a ton on that. And then this channel EQ, I did a boost around 2.6, and then I did a little bit of boost right in like the low mids. I felt like the guitars didn't have enough mud on them. They didn't really have any body to them whatsoever. They sounded a lot like just a bunch of higher frequencies, so I added some more down there. But that is what my guitars sound like, and this is what they sound like with both the left and right channels. Let's take a look at for the leads. They're also just DI tracks. And I'm using, looks like the Vox AC30 or some kind of British amp. It really didn't matter a ton to me on this. I just needed a really reverby sounding lead tone. So I've got that, and I did some stereo delay on that. Looks like a quarter note and a dotted eighth, like I'm playing some praise and worship or something. And a silver verb with about 50% wetness on that. And yeah, that's just kind of to make a little bit of ambiance to the chorus. I think it sounds pretty cool. I do have to admit that I cheated, like I said earlier, and I used Ozone to do the mastering for me. Looks like it added a little more high end, scooped out a little bit around 3000 hertz. That's probably from that bass going absolutely ham right there. And like I said earlier, it did sound a little lacking in the lower mids. So look, that explains why it did a little bit of a boost right there on 350. And then it looks like it boosted even a little bit more around 22. So maybe all my low shelves were a little much. And then just some, limiting. And that's pretty much all I did for the mix. Okay, so I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I do apologize for the mix run through going a little long. I think really this video kind of goes to show though that having really great source tones is priority number one. There's a ton of stuff that you can do to try to clean up some bad frequencies and try to accentuate some other really good frequencies. But in the end, if you don't have really great source tones, then it's going to sound kind of mediocre. But I mean, with that being said, I do think that someone with much more experience than me and someone with a better ear than me could probably take the exact tools that I used and make a much better sounding mix. So if you were to have great source tones and a ton of experience with a great ear, that's pretty much the magic formula for a really great sounding song. But I mean, you can make a demo with one or the other. You don't have to have both to make a demo, in my opinion. Like I said earlier though, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the like button as well as the subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next video.